Hi, everybody. Good afternoon or good morning, depending where you're joining us from. It's my morning. Today you are joining Power for All's special service for energy catalyst companies on Media and Brand 101. So Zoe, if you could go to the next slide, please. Just to give a little context about what we're going to cover today, we'd love to share this quote from Henry Kissinger, one of our former statespeople in the United States. And one of the great things that he understood and that hopefully we will all take from today is understanding that media engagement is actually about looking for ways to get across your messages, not just responding to people's questions. Next slide, please, Zoe. You can go ahead to the next slide. So first, we'll just cover the overview. What's going to be in this section is a little bit about introduction, so who you're speaking with. Just given the time and the number of people we have on this call, we really can't do a round of introductions amongst all the companies, but we will try to do some engagement on Q&A towards the end. So when we do that, please identify yourself in terms of what company you're with. It's great to have you here in any case. We'll also just hit briefly on the objectives for today, and then a little bit about the agenda. So Zoe, please go ahead to the next slide. And Benson, do you want to introduce us maybe?
Yeah, for sure. Good evening, everybody. Good morning, everybody. My name is Benson Kibiti. I'm based in Nairobi. Glad to have you on the call. And my colleague is Kristina Skierka. She's our CEO. And we hope this is going to be a successful, interaction. So Kristina, please.
That's great. Thanks, Benson. Yeah, and feel free to tweet out about what great education you're getting today. We don't mind that at all. So Zoe, if you could go to the next slide, just a little bit about Power for All. For those of you who aren't familiar, so Power for All is a dedicated campaign focused on accelerating the end of energy poverty. And we do that largely by focusing on decentralized renewable solutions. But our approach is an ecosystem approach. And I think one of the reasons that we're here doing this presentation for you today is because when you look at this ecosystem graphic, you see the media on there bright and clear. Part of our early days as a campaign, when we started in 2015, was actually helping to sort of educate and train up a number of companies in the space so that they could really position themselves as part of the global energy supply, a very legitimate form of energy. And one of the best ways to do that is through the media. And it's something, it's a tool, it's a resource that oftentimes many of the companies in the sector trying to solve energy access issues don't leverage to their full opportunities. So with that, that's just a little bit of grounding about why we're here. And then I'm going to turn it over to Benson to talk about our objectives and our agenda for the day.
Great. Thank you so much, Kristina. And one of the some of the key objectives that we are having to, why we're having this session is just to make sure that at least you companies, the companies and the people involved in companies get to learn about how to earn and maintain credibility in today's newsroom. Just because the media is proving to be very dynamic, what is news now is no longer news tomorrow. And so we just want to make sure at least you understand the dynamics of the newsroom, having interacted various media outlets in Sub-Saharan Africa, in the Asian region, and globally. We really have to keep up with the pace on the changing dynamics in the newsroom, and then how to better leverage your company's spokesperson. These are your ambassadors, these are the champions that you should be able to recruit as a company. So one of the key priorities for us as Power for All is to make sure at least we're able to work with your spokesperson, be able to recruit them, on what they say, because what they say is really what some of the media outlets are going to pick. So we need to really learn how to leverage your company's spokesperson, but at the same time, preparing, practice, present your key messages. A lot of times we see, once a person is given a media opportunity, a media interview, they end up talking about some of the things that the media may never pick. So how do you stick to your key messages? So those are some of the things that we will walk you through, and how just maintaining, if your priority is on having 3 key messages, on your interview, how do you maintain that? Making sure that the reporter or the interviewer does not, move you away from your key messages. And then using of transition and bridges to making your point. So these are things Kristina will really, address and be able to walk you through, the use of transitions. I don't think many of the people are aware on how to really use transition and bridges as you're speaking while engaging the press. So these again are some of the things that we will, be talking about today. And again, leveraging press releases, social media, at the same time, Energy Catalyst as a brand, how do we make sure that we are leveraging Energy Catalyst, which is a huge brand, making sure that at least your company is able to plug in the brand and be able to make a name for itself. So those are the five key objectives of our call today, of our training today. But we hope to really make this an interactive session, just as Kristina said. Zoe, next slide, please. Yeah, so quick one, the agenda, we'll spend 5 minutes, looking at the overview, defining media, and then the landscape. What does the landscape look like? 10 minutes, in this session. And of course, the interview, I think, is the most interesting bit, whereby you will be getting to learn about how to really engage the press whenever they ask you questions, but at the same time, learning how to ask and answer, the questions. So, and then the how to do, developing a press release, where are social media channels very relevant in this day and age, especially, looking at, we're seeing a lot of move from, Facebook to now TikTok being the main, social channel. How do we get to leverage some of these channels, social media channels? And then we will spend 10 minutes talking about Energy Catalyst as a program and how best to leverage it. And then it's going to be a Q&A session. So those are the agenda items, and I will let Kristina take over from there. So Zoe, please, next slide.
Yeah, and just a quick notification or acknowledgement. You hear us referring to Zoe. She's our operations manager in the background, so moving our slides along, and also Alessandra Granelli, who does our social media, is on as well. And just to confirm, if people have questions, Zoe or Alessandra, should people be putting things in the chat, or are we raising hands? What is the idea?
Hi there. Yeah, the chat box is a great way if you have any questions. And then at the end, we'll have some time to read out some of those questions.
That's great. Thanks so much, Zoe. And of course, we're already behind the schedule. This is a lot to cram into an hour, and a bit of a spoiler alert. This is actually a teaser to get all of you companies joining us for more in-depth sessions where we actually do practice interviews and train you up a little bit better. So this is just an overview of what we could accomplish in about 60 minutes. Great. So talking about the media landscape, in this section, we're going to cover really what is the media and how do we need to think about it. I think talking about the media and how best to meet their needs is a great way to be thinking about media relations. And then we're going to hear a little bit from Benson from the front lines about how you actually court the media. How do you find a publication that's good for you with a relevant audience? How do you actually find a reporter and get them engaged in a dialogue where they actually may want to cover you? So Zoe, if you'll go on to the next slide. Just briefly, it is important to realize that there's basically 3 kinds of media. So you'll see here, we've grouped them as paid, owned, and earned. And the reason that it's important to, I think, understand these distinctions is because it really does affect your strategies for each. And there is value in all of these. And there's also downsides to all of these. But just briefly, we list here paid. They can also, all of these resources can also be earned media. But essentially what people often do, and you'll see it now online and things like Outbrain and otherwise, is actually pay for syndication of their content. So that's the kind of thing that you'll often see in magazines online. And you can also obviously take out ads and that sort of thing, or do these sort of adverts that look like actual written articles. In the owned department, these are things that you decide as a company to keep as your resources. And this is a great way to keep a dialogue going with those who are interested in following your work, which again connects, I think, really importantly to making friends with the media. So newsletters, websites, podcasts, etc. And then finally, earned is when you are actually doing what you think you might be doing, which is doing the work to get covered. That can be coverage or placed articles in a range of publications, but that's really where learning how to pitch the media and engage with the media comes in. So if you could go to the next slide. So a little bit about the media. First of all, they're humans. That's a great place to start. So in the same way you think about relationship and relationship development, perhaps maybe with some investors that you've had, you want to think about media in the same way. So this is an audience for you. And remember that like the rest of us, all the media are time strapped and they're looking for things that stand out. So thinking about these 6 areas, I think, is a good way to start developing your strategy around relationship development for the media. So what is it that they want? They want something with impact, something that stands out and is interesting to cover. Right now, stuff around COVID or getting to zero, those are all hot topics. Also prominence, understanding, again, we're talking about leveraging brands, whether it's Energy Catalyst or the UK government, or brands that are bigger than your own to really up your leadership quotient. So thinking about how you can tie to other things going on that are prominent. Relevance, always connecting with trends that are going on, it's super critical. And then when you think about that, novelty within those trends makes a difference as well. What is your unique value add? And figuring out a way to communicate that grabs somebody in the first couple of minutes is essential. Conflict does create coverage as well, especially and oftentimes with our sector, the David and Goliath approach, us, quote unquote, smaller guys or little guys trying to take on incumbent energy systems can oftentimes be a great hook. And then lastly, hard numbers. You always want to be bringing data. Whether it's your own data that you're researching, or maybe you've proved something out with your technology, or you're actually cultivating data by doing other additional research. These are sort of the 6 secret elements for engaging with media on the things they want in the way they want. So the next slide, we'll talk a little bit, we'll hear from Benson about how he courts the press.
Great, thanks, Kristina. And so on this specific slide, being a communications lead for Power4, I get to interact with a lot of media outlets both in Sub-Saharan Africa and, of course, the Asian region, building stories, looking out what stories are trending. And so the best way to really find how to interact with the media is to cluster them in a way that, based on their areas of interest. Let's say ESI Africa and Green Tech Media, they are really interested in stories around energy access, and so if you have a story around that, those are some of the key media outlets that you would look out for. Business, CNBC and Forbes Africa, probably Forbes, they are really keen on business stories. And I think that's where you are really focused on. I mean, beyond energy access, then you're really into business. So again, you need to identify media outlets that are really interested in business stories. And then technology, Wired, TechCrunch. These are, media outlets that are really keen on knowing new technologies, new innovations. And so again, just learning on how best to work with your comms department, and also working with people like us, just making sure at least we are working with you to identify what media outlets are interested in your areas or probably in your project, and then impact. A lot of media outlets are really interested in telling human stories. So that is impact. So DevEx or Thomson Reuters Foundation, I mean, they're really keen on telling, stories that are from the communities, like Kristina said, lessons from the front line or people who are working directly with communities. We want to hear community voices. So I think that is where you need to really focus on in terms of, implementing your project. You need to link your project with a human impact story. So if you're developing a mini grid in Africa, if you're setting up an innovation that is going to impact people, I think a lot of you might be very technical, but also I would encourage you to really focus on the impact of your technologies to the communities, because a lot of media outlets are very keen in telling impact stories. So how to call the press, I think this is a full-time job. So you need to really be able to create a relationship with your media, with some of these journalists. A reporter is always busy. They're always looking out for new stories, new ideas. And so you have to really find the best way to keep up with them. And what I do is that I've got this editorial calendar that I've created that, I always keep up with, making sure at least I know what the stories are, what stories the journalists are writing on, but at the same time getting to know exactly what is their areas of interest. And so like I said, energy. If your story is probably you're launching a new product or a new innovation, of course we know what genres to speak to. So there's also, I will speak about the social media, but I just wanted to mention this, that you also need to be very active on a strong communications department, just learning on how to really engage them and getting to, like Twitter. For me, I use Twitter just because that's where most of the majority of the reporters, tweet or talk about their ongoing work. And so again, making sure that you're interacting with them, but at the same time, knowing there's a limit. You cannot, pitching, a good case is when I'm pitching a story. On a typical day, I would probably look at what one of the EC companies is doing in Africa or probably in the Asian region, and then be able to come up with a story pitch and then pitch that story. Say, hey, this new company is working on an innovation that is likely going to impact how people are using artificial intelligence or blockchain. And then I need to know exactly what are some of these reporters or editors would be interested in these stories. So again, just making sure at least we are presenting the right stories and also engaging them on a regular basis. And making sure, and also knowing, like Kristina said, they're humans. So make your pitch friendly. Talk to them in every time you're having new development, just tell them, hey, we are coming up with new technologies, we are developing a new innovation, would you be interested? So, just getting in touch on them on a regular basis, but at the same time, knowing that they have a deadline. So one of the other things that I needed to mention is that a reporter will come to you if they're aware that you're credible source of information or you would be willing to share more information about your technology, then you need to meet their deadline. They're always working against the deadline, and so towards the deadline. And so the best thing you can do is always making sure that you're responding to their request, and also just learning what stories they are really interested in. So I think that is all about it, Kristina. Probably if you have something to add, but if not, then Zoe, please, you can go to the next slide and we can talk about interviews.
Yeah, let me just add a few notes to that, and then we can get into the interview discussion. So just briefly, I do want to distinguish between a cold call and a warm lead. So oftentimes, let's say that, as Benson advised, you've gone ahead and you've researched maybe 10 publications that you think would be great to reach an audience. We'll cover about thinking about your key messages and whatnot in a minute, but in terms of how to reach out to somebody who doesn't know you, I highly recommend getting to know that reporter better. So look at what they've covered recently. Always a good idea to reference recent coverage and flatter them a bit about what they've written, and then explain how you fit into that interest for them. So I think, you have to remember that in the same way, you're always looking for new customers, media is always looking for new stories. So if you can help them build their base and give them things to write about that they can pitch their editors, all the better. I think it's also important to understand a little bit about freelancers versus, beat reporters and editors. And each one of them have a very distinct value and importance. And we'll talk about that a little bit more when we're talking about press releases. But essentially, editors are making decisions. If you're doing things like placed articles, you generally want to reach out to an editor. We'll talk about placed articles in a minute. But when it comes to reporters and freelancers can write for a whole bunch of different publications. And so understanding, again, they will still have a beat or an interest area, following them on Twitter, trying to understand when you see an opening to engage with them is a great approach. And whereas reporters oftentimes they will bring ideas to their editors, but oftentimes editors will assign things to them. And so that's where, Benson was saying sometimes reporters will reach out to you directly, which is just one more reason to think about the media as relationships. So with that, so if you want to go ahead to the next few slides, just to cover what's going to be in this section. We're going to talk a little bit about how to prepare for interviews. And again, this is just our teaser for our more in-depth workshop, which you can sign up for. We'll talk about that. But also what makes a good spokesperson, some common mistakes that people make, and key techniques. And let me just say that one of the things to remember, and we'll talk about this again in a few slides, is that Just because you're talking to a reporter, it doesn't mean you're going to get covered. But it's really important because talking to reporters leads ultimately to coverage or to shifting the narrative, things that people think about and want to write about, which is a huge piece of the work that Power for All does and the work that you're facing as well, fighting an incumbent energy system. So Zoe, if you'd like to go to the next slide. So talking here a little bit about how to prepare. And again, you know, it's maybe, I don't know, it'd be good to hear from Benson how often he talks with a reporter before that turns into an interview for me or somebody else on the team. But essentially, when you get that interview, you want to start by thinking about what is the headline that you want to get out of this. It's very easy to get thrown off or to lose track of what you're talking about, as it would be for anybody, not just for startup companies, but you always want to think about what it is you want to communicate. So go into an interview thinking about what's your ideal headline and what are your top 3 messages. And I say that because oftentimes I've seen people respond to interviews and just simply answer questions from reporters without walking in with their own agenda. And that's a wasted interview. It's just not even worth your time. So also to prepare, I would suggest that you think about what's the worst possible question you could be asked and how you would answer that. And if there was one thing you wanted to get printed, what was your great quote? What's the thing you want to be remembered for when this actually does go to print? But again, staying focused, repeating your key messages, and always thinking about how you want to wrap up the interview is super important. I want to just really emphasize how critical it is to keep reporting keep saying what you're trying to get across. It might feel a little tedious at points when you're in an interview with a reporter that may last 5 or 10 minutes. They rarely last longer than that. But in those minutes, if you keep repeating the same message, you're more likely for it to get picked up. So Zoe, if you could go to the next slide on preparation, that would be great. Right, I want to talk a little bit about what it is to be a good spokesperson. Just because you're the founder of a company, just because you're the head of research, maybe you're the comms person, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're a great spokesperson. There could be other people within the organization that would be better spokespeople. So what are those characteristics? So some of the things we're covering today, somebody who actually understands what the role of the media is and how to meet their needs. If you work on meeting the needs of the media, you'll be successful from a communications point of view. It's also important to know that journalists oftentimes, especially in a new sort of nascent sector like ours, even though it might not feel that way to us, journalists aren't going to be experts. Oftentimes we've seen people become journalists to cover this sector who maybe used to do green technology. Maybe they did large scale solar farms. Maybe somebody was a technology reporter. All of these things have to speak to, it's really challenging to get somebody who's an expert in our particular kind of energy. I know several times with some local media in Africa, we would have people who covered, I don't know, like infrastructure. And infrastructure is a huge topic, but then trying to drill deep and write a meaningful report on the work of the decentralized energy community, for say, is quite challenging. So you have to make it easy for journalists to feel smart and be ready to educate them as you go along in your interview. Again, as I said, realize that interviews don't always equal coverage, and that's okay. And be comfortable saying when you don't know. It's totally fine to get back to somebody if you don't have an answer. Just respond over email with more detailed information. And then we're going to cover a few specific techniques to control the interview. So Zoe, if you could go on to the next slide, please. Great. So first of all, again, we've emphasized several times, but it's the really important thing we want you to take away from this, that you need to walk into interviews with your own agenda. Importantly, a lot of people, especially those who maybe have more experience in research and development, want to tell you all the reasons, give you all the lead up to the big finding, and that's a sure way to lose a reporter. Get straight to the point. Tell us about the conclusion. What's the big idea? And then back that up with evidence. And just remember that the first thing you say in those first 2 minutes is the most important thing you can do. I would also emphasize that I've seen many companies get on the phone with reporters and forget to emphasize what it is they do. So people just get into messages or get into answering questions without just giving their elevator pitch, their boilerplate, if you will. So that's really critical, is always remember you're talking to somebody who probably doesn't know you and doesn't know your entity. So just start out reminding them what you do. You know, we love to say this, people want to know what time it is, not how the watch is made, so just get to it. And the more you sort of drone on, the more likely, A, your point is gonna get lost, but B, you'll forget what you were talking about. And you could end up going off on a tangent and not achieving your objective of the interview, which is to get your message across. And finally, less is more. Just get to the point. Really try to be very aware when you're in an interview, and quickly get to your key points. So if you could go to the next slide. Right, so common mistakes. Again, you'll notice that we're practicing our own best practices here and reiterating key points. So don't talk too much. It's very confusing. You can also go the other side and talk too little and seem not engaging. So you want to really hit that right pattern, that right sort of rapport established. Using jargon can be really challenging. So try to keep things, especially if you're more on the research and development side or the scientific side, you know, create allegories, create things that people can understand. So if you've got a number for, I don't know, how much carbon you're displacing, give a good example of what that's comparable to, that somebody could understand. So X number of cars off the road, whatnot. Reporter paraphrasing is important. Oftentimes a good reporter will report back what they think they've heard when you're in the interview. Don't hesitate to correct them. They're humans, they'll make mistakes. And remember just to speak for yourself, and really be okay with responding to, you know, real news, not fake news, but public facts that are out there. It is the reporter's job to challenge you as well. So you do get softball questions, and that's something we'll cover more in our sort of deep dive sessions, which you can sign up for at the end here. But you want to just be very aware the difference between a softball and a hardball question, and be trained in how to respond. Zoe, please go to the next slide. Great. So some key techniques, just 2 more slides on interviews here. These are the 3 I would really love you to take away from this discussion today. So on repetition, bridging, and credibility, if you can manage all these 3 things, you're 85% of the way you need to be to a successful interview. Again, repetition. I think I probably beat that point, you know, to a pulp, but really, you know, you have to just think about how important it is to keep somebody's attention, especially when we're all living in such a distracted world, and most likely reporters are getting text and they're checking their email while they're talking to you because they're busy. So don't hesitate to reemphasize several times what it is that's important to you. Bridging we'll cover in a little bit more in depth, but this is a very important technique. You'll see savvy politicians adopting this all the time, but really, you know, going back to Henry Kissinger and his approach, this is a way to make sure you don't get taken off track, and that you're actually using a reporter's questions to get across your answers. And finally, credibility. It's really important that people know that you have the chops to be talking to them and that you're trustworthy. You know, you have to remember at the end of the day that reporters, if they print wrong information, they can lose their jobs. So both being credible as a person, authentic, demonstrating that you have some experience in the topic, but then always feeling free to follow up with the reporter with, you know, evidence to maybe back up some of those facts that you've shared, will really help them out in writing a story. Go ahead, Zoe, to the next slide. Great. So a little bit more about bridging. You know, this is just a way to think about it. You've been asked about a problem, so you offer a solution. Another way to sort of manage if you're thrown off base in an interview is to just take control of the questions. So you can pause. You can say, oh, well, that's an excellent idea. Actually, if I was going to ask myself this question, it would sound like this. And then you can set up your own answer. And it's really okay if you can't comment. And if somebody's trying to bring up something super negative, there's a way to move past that, which is to acknowledge what they're saying, but then turn it into a positive. again, we'll go in more detail when we have more time on our small group sessions. Finally, you know, I think returning to positive points is something that we like to stress a lot. And related to that, you know, there's a way to, I think, really focus on that. So some of the kind of bridging techniques I would suggest and phrases you can use, you know, you can say, well, the real issue is, or that's a great question. This is how I would answer, or here's another great question. You can also say, no, I can't talk about that, but I can talk about this. So those are just some examples of what bridging is. It's basically taking a question that's been asked to you, using a connector phrase, and being able to respond on the topic you actually want to respond on. So Zoe, if you could go to the next slide. Great, so answer by touching on the question, provide a basic answer, end with a key message. I just want to emphasize key messages are always your safe place. You'll be surprised if, you know, how often you're talking to the media and you might get thrown off. So always return to bridging if you need it. And remember that this is your interview. So they may have questions, but it's really your agenda. And never hesitate to pause. I've often seen people get nervous, feeling like they have to fill in space, dead space on a call, and you've got plenty of time. Just pause, take a breath, remember what you're trying to communicate, and go back to that. So great. So Zoe, if you could continue on to the next section. We're actually doing great on time. I'm so happy about that. We're going to cover some more workshop-y items around how to. So Benson, you're going to lead this section. Let me turn it over to you.
Thank you, Kristina. On one point on the key messages, there's something I'm going to talk about, leveraging existing external milestone, but at the same time, existing trending stories. COVID is a big deal right now. If you're able to plug your stories along those trending topics, they are more interested. Most of the reporters are very keen to know the linkage or the nexus between what you're telling them and the existing trends. But on this specific, item, I'll just speak about press releases, social media, placing an article, like I was talking about pitching media outlets, and then energy catalysts. So Zoe, can go to the next slide, please. And so how would you define a press release? Of course, you've had a lot of people talking about PR, but it's the same thing, media statement, news release or media release. Typically, it's a brief news story. And how I would describe a press release is a short comparing news story written. And so, you've seen about, people writing 3-page press releases. I think it should be short. And so just as we've noted here, it should be short, but at the same time, it should follow the inverted pyramid, meaning you start with the most important stories, because a lot of media houses or media outlets or journalists, they want to, once they read the first paragraph, they want to know exactly what is the story, how important is it, how relevant is it, in regards to their, their reporting. On the left, you can see a screenshot of one of the press releases that we did in 2019. And of course, out of this press release, we had a great media coverage because we were able to, package it in a way that it was appealing to the media outlets. But this, these are things that we can always work with you, just try to make sure that you're coming up with good press releases or media releases. But one thing that you also should note is that it's good to have one quote from a ready spokesperson, like you see, or probably the person behind the innovation, just one quote. And then one of the most important things that people forget is including the media contact. Who should the media contact in case they want to follow up with your story? So again, you should remember to include the media, your media contact and information, and then a boilerplate. A boilerplate is simply about your organization, short, brief, paragraph that defines who you are, probably what you're doing as an organization. So I think we can, during the detailed, group trainings, we will speak more about the boilerplates and get to know how best we can help you shape your boilerplates and how best you can describe your organization. But there are should and should nots that you should include in your press release. And one thing is it should be ideally it should be 1 page, but of course might end up being 2 pages. But most of the time we would recommend that you stick to 1 page, and then having a lot of formatting, including exclamation marks, point, exclamation points. Unless it's a direct quote, please avoid them. And then exaggerations. I mean, a lot of media outlets, they're really keen in doing a story about your companies, all about your project, but please don't exaggerate because they will time it as PR. So again, just planning on our best to shape your stories and also not exaggerating them at the same time. If it's an impact story, just stick to the facts, and remember, data. A lot of media outlets want to see some numbers. So if you're able to include some numbers there, please do. And then use of words, I, we, our, me. I mean, it means that you're owning everything that you're putting out there. And at the same time, people will really, relate to your press release. Zoe, next slide.
Oh, hey, Benson, just real quick. Back in the day, people used to put things out on the wire, Can you just speak to that? Because, releasing a press release on a wire has an expense to it. Is it something that we actually recommend still today, or do we have a different approach?
It's still happening. It's still happening, Kristina, and a lot of people don't, go for PR. They would rather break the news on their Twitter pages. But I think it's always good to really, put out a statement, because that's how they're able to get their quotes. That you see some of the stories. Most of the media outlets, they want to publish stories, but they will also pick the quote that was prominent on the press release. So I think it's always good to really keep up with the press, sending media releases. But at the same time, I've seen a lot of companies preferring to use media agencies. I think, if you ask me, it's good that it comes from your organization, because once you use a PR agency, it's most likely going to be seen as a public relation, just as a promotion piece. So it's always good that it comes from your organization. Next slide. So on this slide, I'll speak about social media channels, and we call them the big 5. Of course, you've seen how, people say the digital world is taking over from the traditional media, TV, radio. Most of the people are likely to get news on social media, other than waiting for prime time news to watch what's been happening during the day. So they would prefer, knowing what's happening on Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, and then YouTube channels. And of course, it's always good. I'm seeing a lot of companies really leveraging their YouTube channels. It's a good thing because this is a new channel where you can broadcast about your company, about your project. And we in the sector, we are likely going to pick some of those stories from your YouTube channels. But of course, like I said, Twitter is very important because it's more of a news channel. If you want to know what's happening right now in Egypt, or probably in West African region, or probably in India, then you just log in on Twitter using an hashtag. You're likely going to see what's happening, in those specific regions. Same thing to LinkedIn, and LinkedIn is more of a business channel, and then Instagram, very short videos about your innovations, and we're seeing a lot of videos being posted on these channels, and it tells you why you should really focus on producing very short about your project, because most of the people, they don't have time to watch 10 minutes or probably 20 minutes or even an hour. They would want to see something which is short, precise, 2 minutes, 3 minutes maximum, something that can be shared on social media. But I wanted to speak about why your company actually needs a social media channel. A lot of organizations, they really want to leverage social media channels as a platform where they can talk about their brand, so increasing brand awareness, but at the same time driving traffic to our website. If you share a story on your social media, let's say on your Twitter channel, and then create a link, and then that link, if someone clicks on that link, it's a way of directing people to your website. So again, if you want to generate more traffic on, or to your website, you can leverage social media, to post those links about news, and then, directing them to your website to read the full stories. And then generating new leads growing revenue, increasing signups and sales. Probably, let's say you're selling some solar home systems in Africa, or probably in some in specific regions. Then you're able to track how you're interacting with your customers, at the same time getting feedback from your customers. So that engagement point is really important. Then boosting your brand engagement. I think I mentioned about brand awareness, and then building a company around your business and building a community around your business. So I don't know if you guys have seen latest tweet by Weetabix, and we've seen a lot of responses from various multinationals, just describing what Weetabix had posted on the social channels. And so it shows the community around such multinationals, but coming to your company, I think it's always good. It's a good way to monitor who you're interacting with, who is following you, on these channels, and also reaching out to them. I always find it very interesting. Once you've achieved a certain milestone, let's say you've gained 10,000 followers, or let's say 100,000 followers, reaching out to your followers and thanking them, and also asking for more engagement. So using them as a platform of engaging your community, then providing customer service. I think it's either one of the solar home systems whereby they're using, these social channels to get feedback and probably, getting to respond to customers' complaints, but at the same time, way of getting feedback from your customers, asking them to rate your product. It's a good platform, good platforms, and also increasing mentions in the press. I think if the more you keep on engaging on a specific topic, let's say you're engaging on, waste to energy, or probably blockchain or artificial intelligence, they would, people out, let's say the press, the media specifically, they would be keen to follow your channels, just making sure they're keeping track of what you're posting and also reaching out to you. And then listening to the conversations around your brand, use of hashtag, it's always good, because currently we're using Energy Catalyst to track the conversations around the Energy Catalyst program. So you can use your social media channels to track the conversations. What are people talking about, specific, your company, or probably, let's say your lead scientist, what discoveries have they made, or probably what product are you developing, and making sure that you have those champions. A lot of organizations, they're developing good product, but people don't see the faces behind those products. So it's good that you showcase some of the people behind innovations. That's where they would, just try to humanize your product, or humanize your stories, the stories that you're trying, the technologies that you're trying to develop, and putting faces on those, technologies. So, posting, sharing about your founders, the stories of the founders, how they develop, what they're currently working on, telling a story and placing, the humans or the people behind those products. So that is more of it about social media. Unless Kristina, you've got something too, you can chime in.
Yeah, just briefly, and I want to make a note that we have 15 minutes left, so we might not be able to get to Q&A today, but we'll certainly take all the questions that have come in through the chat and respond in a follow-up. Benson, I would just like you to respond to something I often hear from young companies, which is, we can't do everything. We have to pick one thing we can do on social media. So my question would be is, what would you recommend? And then secondly, let's say a company had $500 to spend on a launch announcement. Would you suggest that they spend it either A, on putting out a press release on a wire like VentureWire or PR Newswire, B, creating a video that they use on the social channels, or C, paying for promoted posts on one of these platforms? So you've got two questions. They're both challenges. I want to see what you say.
Thanks, Kristina. On the second one, I would prefer, companies producing a video, because that's more of a long-term, content that you can always be posting, other than investing a lot of money in a PR agency. Yeah, there's gonna, they will just share it with their media contact. There's, it will be very hard for you to track any engagement probably you're receiving probably about your stories. So if you can document, if you can shoot a very short video and be able to share that on your channels, then you're likely going to be able to, rate the engagement level based on what people are saying about your product. But at the same time, it's easy for you. I think as a startup, I would not invest much money, engaging the PR agency, but, I would rather invest about something about a story that tells something about my product, and that is a video. I think a video would be, the best way to, produce your content, but at the same time, share more about your company.
Great. Well, Zoe, let's continue on. Just really need to keep an eye on time at this point. So do you want to keep this maybe a little bit shorter, Benson?
Yeah, for sure. So placing articles, this is really more of a full-time job, but Kristina asked about having someone who's not well-versed with these technologies, or probably you want to hire and you don't have the resources. I would say the founders should really, being a founder of a company, it's a full-time job, and so at least you should learn on how to be able to share stories on your social channels, but also being responsive. Whenever there's an ask from your consumers, or probably from people who are really keen in investing in you. So it should be a skill that you should learn, and that's why we're really hoping that you can benefit from these trainings, and also finding a way that Power4All can work with you. On placing articles, this is one of the most important components of telling stories, and it involves being selective about defining the media outlet that you're pushing out your stories to, finding an angle, the trending topics or milestones. I said COVID is really an interesting, it's a trend that has been happening for the last 1 year. So if you can find a way to really link your story with the trending stories or trending milestones, then you're likely going to really interest that reporter or the journalist. And then you need to structure your media pitch, defining who, what, where, when, and why of your story is likely going to really interest that media or probably a reporter. And then creating news value by explaining why the story is interesting, and then including a call to action, and then using a strong subject line. This is something that our Chief Campaign Officer, William Brent, is really good at in terms of, defining what a strong subject line is. He's always insisted that it should need to be attracting to the editor. You need to find a way that you're able, you might be telling a story, but you might be having a very interesting story, but how you really pitch it to the media, the subject line of your email really determines if they're going to pick it or open it actually and read it. So you need to really find a good subject line. Then personalizing your pitch, we said about using we, I, we, ours as a company, just making sure at least they are able to really know that you're honing up the story and it's a real story. And then follow-ups. A lot of people say finding media or following up with media, it's a bit hard. And so they end up sending emails, but we prefer at Power4All, we always recommend that you call media houses. Direct calls are always good because they're quick and you get to get feedback. So being proactive and also learning on our best to, follow up with the press. So next slide, please.
That's great, Benson, thanks. And just a quick note to plug the value of placed articles. It's something we've relied on a lot through the years. That was from DevEx. We've been able to get some incredible coverage for the sector, whether it was The Economist or, we've been in the New York Times for the sector a couple of times. But the great thing about placed articles is you control the story. If you can get the pitch right and the editor approves or agrees to place your article, that really is an opportunity for you to create thought leadership. So I think it's one of the most effective, cost-effective strategies actually for young companies. So just briefly now, we're going to talk a little bit about how to connect with Energy Catalyst and leverage both the Energy Catalyst brand and their messaging. The hope is that through all of this work and support that comes from Energy Catalyst, we're picking up on sharing some of the same messages and some of the same, I think, momentum across the entire cohort of companies. We're all after the same thing. So just emphasizing that Energy Catalyst does have brand guidelines, which hopefully have been shared with you through your engagement managers, as well as the messaging for Energy Catalyst. But the key things they're trying to get across here, which I think would probably resonate with most of those on the call today, is the importance of acceleration. We just can't wait any longer. The value of the network and the partnership that's been created, talking, as Benson was mentioning, about the impact and really the value of having this sort of shared knowledge. So just so you know that that's always going to be some themes that come out of Energy Catalyst, and be great to see that reflected relevant in some of your communications work as well. Zoe, I want to cover briefly a tiny bit about the most important thing in the next slide on the Energy Catalyst brand. So this is what's known as a word mark. And basically, we would have shared with you through the engagement managers the standards for that. The mark can be useful to have on your website. If you did, say, for example, a co-authored press release, you would consider having that as part. But I think it's just really important if you use the word mark, please be sure to use the 2 standards that are approved and make sure that it's not out of proportion. A lot of times people try to use the tools we all have on our desktops now, and we end up stretching out of proportion things like logos and word marks. And there's also a standard for a clear space around it that has to be met. So please review those, especially if you want to get the full value of leveraging the Energy Catalyst brand. On to the next slide, Zoe. It's just a brief picture of the examples of what's been approved. So again, either white on black is fine, but please use either these standards of vertical or horizontal. And then, so if you'll go to the next slide, just a few recommendations. And Benson, we have just a few minutes. So do you just want to talk a little bit about how to best use Energy Catalyst in some of the basic social media approaches we've talked about today?
Yeah, absolutely. And I just wanted to share a link in the chat box. Probably now that we have most of the companies here, they can click on that link and follow the Energy Catalyst LinkedIn page. That's how best we are able to engage you. And also, whatever you are posting, we can always tag you. So whenever you're posting something on LinkedIn, please tag that page Energy-Catalyst, and then using hashtag Energy Catalyst hashtag. That way, we are able to amplify and track some of these posts that you're always probably about your project, and also it gives us a better way of tracking who is doing what where. And then writing a press release, always include an Energy Catalyst boilerplate and then potentially a quote. Those are probably things we're going to do a deep dive during our a group trainings. Next slide, please.
Yeah, Benson, do you just want to explain for those who might not be as familiar what a boilerplate is?
Yeah, absolutely. So boilerplate is a brief description of your company or your organization. So it defines who you are and what your mission is. So that is a summary. It gives you a brief overview what the company is, what your mission is, and what is it that you're hoping to achieve. So it specifically, I would say it probably the best. Every time you go to a forum, then you'll see probably companies, and then you click on those companies, you'll see that brief description. So it's a brief description of your company, but it needs to be very short and needs to be communicating to your audiences, your target consumers, who your company is and what your mission is.
That's great. So, and again, for young companies, you might not have a communications department, but in our sort of deep dives, we can help educate you about how to create a boilerplate that's relevant to put at the end of press releases, or simply to consider for standard engagement with media. It's just a great tool in the toolbox, and it's pretty close to an elevator pitch, but probably slightly different, a little bit more succinct, and potentially it has some, specific data in it. So I'm just aware we have 4 minutes. So, and we have still a couple wrap-up slides. Benson, let me just ask one question maybe from the chat, and then we'll go ahead and do our final couple slides. And just a reminder to everybody, this is actually recorded and will be posted, in fact, on the Energy Catalyst website in the password protection section. So, so yes, for all of those who are wanting to know if the slides are available, absolutely. So Benson, here's a question for you. I'm just going to go with the last one that's in the box. A question about trend fatigue. Are people still wanting to hear COVID stories, or do we want post-COVID stories? So it'd be interesting to get your take on that, since you are based in Kenya, on the continent, where COVID has been a very different experience from what we've had in the United States and what many of the companies have had in the UK. So please answer that, and then we'll do our final slides.
Thank you, Kristina. So I totally agree with Alistair. I mean, there's a lot of fatigue around COVID, and so what people are looking for as a solution, COVID is, yes, it's becoming a menace. It's a menace. It's really affecting so many people's livelihoods. So I think what the kind of stories that we would be looking out for, or probably the media outlet that I speak to, they're looking for solutions. So there's been a lot of interest about innovations around solutions that are probably helping people recover. So I would say post-COVID, but looking at the solutions, the solution side, not just talking about how many people are losing their lives, or how many people are losing their jobs, but let's focus on the hope side, whereby people are resilient, there is hope, and so here are the solutions that we're proposing, and this is how best they can leverage these solutions.
Great. Okay, so let's move on to our last few slides so we can end on time. Great. So just remember that Power for All, oftentimes people call us the PR agency for the sector. We are absolutely here to help tell your story. And that's part of our work with Energy Catalyst. So just to hit on a couple of points, if you are doing something related to COVID, it is useful because people are still reporting on it left and right. But obviously, as we're looking ahead to COP this year, on the UK island, assuming it'll still be there and not broken up by the time COP hits us. There's going to be a lot of interest in things related to climate change, and obviously the UK has made some very bold statements about vision and building back better. So all of that is critical and really useful to helping tell your story. Other things that really connect to a national impact or building UK's global presence, especially post-Brexit, will be very well received. And then the government itself has wanted us to mention a few things here, which is they have a program called 101 Faces of Innovation. So interested, if there's some people sort of deeper in your organization that could be profiled, the sort of unsung heroes that are doing some work that maybe most of us might not see, but maybe really power what your company does or power solutions to some of these above bullets. And then finally, I think it's just really great to know that UKRI, which does have a pretty big media machine, is happy and willing to hear news from the portfolio. So we'd really love to see a change where we could get a really nice regular flow of information from the companies. And again, part of what we'll cover in our deeper sections is how do you know if you have a good story? I think that's one of the things that young companies might not have as much visibility in, is either how interesting they are or how to make themselves appear as interesting as they could be, and just how to always be thinking in storylines. So Zoe, if we could go to our last slide and end right on time, that would be great. So what we're going to be doing in the small group trainings is really getting into these 3 key tactics that help drive interviews. We'll also do practice interviews, but we're going to talk about prep and understanding a reporter's agenda, also learning how to, again, use your messages for the interview and make sure you don't just say the same words every time. You think about different ways to get your message across, and training you on how to do that. And then finally, really controlling the speed and outcomes of the interview. So again, it'll come back to how you can talk about yourself as a credible source without necessarily coming across as arrogant or narcissistic, but really how to own that interview. So Benson, how are people meant to sign up for our small group media trainings, and when are we planning to schedule those?
I think what we can do after this call, we will send an email with some notes about how best they can sign up for the trainings.
Okay, that's fantastic. Great. And then Zoe will make note of all the questions in the chat, and we'll be sure to follow up over email to the group. Thank you so much for joining today. I hope you learned something and took away the messages we wanted to communicate, and you go out in the world and help tell great stories about all the innovation coming from Energy Catalyst companies. Take care.